Excellent, thank you. Welcome everyone. My name is Alex Murphy. I'm the political director for Yes on 2, Alaskans for Better Elections. And whether you're tuning in on Zoom or Facebook Live, we're excited to have you here for this discussion. Today, we're going to be talking about a very important and timely topic of race and power and diversity in our elections, and how the reforms like those in ballot measure 2 have been effective in increasing representation and participation in our elections, both among elected officials and among voters. And so really excited to be joined by a fantastic panel today. I am not going to be moderating. I'm going to pass this off to Kimberly Waller, who we're honored to have. And I also want to say thank you to our speakers, Mohit, Nair, Jonathon Taylor, and Dalecia Young, who Kimberly will introduce in a minute. But just to take a minute and introduce Kimberly, she was born in Fairbanks and raised in Anchorage, and has had a powerful career in broadcasting here in Alaska and around the country. And she's the founder and CEO of Women's Power League of Alaska, which is a network of professionals united in strengthening Alaska through the empowerment and leadership of women. So thank you, Kimberly, for being here and for walking us through. And I'm just going to pass it off to you.
Hi, good afternoon. Actually, is it still morning? It's noon. Good afternoon. How's everyone feeling? I have to say that I have an extra bolstered amount of respect for people who log on to Zoom on the weekends. Like, y'all are a dedicated, special crop of folks. So I just want to start by shouting you out right there. And thank you so much for joining us for this event. We are super excited to have the opportunity to talk about the importance of ballot measure 2. And you are going to hear from some pretty incredible people today. We've got an exciting panelist group, and I am excited to introduce them. But the first thing I wanted to do was encourage everyone, if you feel like turning on your videos, please turn on your videos, get engaged. If you don't, that's okay too, but we would, we'd like to see you and exchange, but it is completely up to you. Hi to everyone who's checking us out on Facebook Live, and I am just gonna go ahead and get started. I realize that we have an hour today. The thing about these styles of panels that I've come to find out, because we've been having a lot of them leading up to the election, is that they go by really fast. And so I wanna make sure that we are giving the opportunity for everyone to be heard, to get their questions asked. I myself have been learning a lot about ballot measure 2. And so there are 3 parts to ballot measure 2. And so that means that there are 3 areas in which we need to be informed. So hopefully I will help to bring some understanding to ballot measure 2 along with these very capable panelists. And with that, I am just going to jump in and introduce them. And then right after I do that, I'm going to talk a little bit about the overview that is ballot measure 2. Or actually, you know what, maybe what I should do before I introduce them is do that. Let me give an overview of ballot measure 2, and then I'll introduce my guests. Okay, so ballot measure 2 combines 3 common sense updates to our election system for a better Alaska. These nonpartisan reforms are designed to put the power of Alaska's electoral system back in the hands of voters. A yes on 2 will end the influence of dark money in Alaska campaigns. It will open primary elections to all voters, and it will allow voters in the general election to rank candidates in the order of their preference. So Alaskans for Better Elections and ballot measure 2 is essentially about giving more voice, more choice, and more power to Alaskan voters. And we love that, especially with everything that's happening, not only in the state, but in our country. When I hear, more choice, that is really attractive to me, specifically as an African-American woman, lifetime Alaskan, went out into the world, have come back to Alaska, and am very much relearning the world of politics here. I think that choice is extremely important, not just in our state, but in every state. So that's an overview of ballot measure 2, and we're going to continue to kind of break that down a little bit further for you. But I want to start by introducing you to Dalecia Young, and she is the operations coordinator at Alaskans for Better Elections. So Dalecia, just introduce yourself and talk about what drives you and why ballot measure 2 makes you so excited.
Hi, thank you for that overview and introduction. My name is Dalecia Young, and I'll just say, like right now, I'm still getting over my fear of public speaking, and there isn't anything much more public than streaming on Facebook Live.
Girl, we
Um,
got this. We
so
got this. Go ahead,
I,
Denise.
I just like to say that because I tend to start rambling when I like kind of freak out.
Yeah.
But I think I'm getting better at it. But I'm still really happy to be here. And so I like to think and use the analogy of a three-legged table when we're looking at ballot measure 2. Without one leg, the table falls down and does not function as a table. I wanted to start off with that because the number one common thing we get for people who might be kind of on the fence, where they're like, I like this, but it looks like a lot. It looks like maybe too much. Is this a Trojan horse? Like, why so many? And so if you think of it as a three-legged table, you start to understand how all three components of ballot measure 2 work together to give power back to us Alaskan voters. Um, Open primaries ends political gatekeeping by the parties into our primary system. So there's a primary and then a general, but only two parties right now have the power to pick which people we vote for in the general election. If we open that up, we get a broader and more diverse stage for voices and ideas and innovation. And then with ranked choice voting, we are no longer asked to vote against candidates. We are no longer asked to vote for a lesser of two evils. We are no longer asked to just only vote strategically. We can vote our conscience with our first pick. We can vote strategically with our second pick and our third pick or fourth pick as that goes. And that all amounts to making sure that people who win seats of power in our political system win with the majority of support of voters. Currently, somebody that 60 odd percent of people actually don't want as our represented officials can win seats because the way our system works right now is that they can just campaign to their niche base and have them just turn out in numbers that actually only represent a minority of Alaskans, and they're winning seats with that system, and that is fundamentally broken. So the fact that ballot measure 2 not only just opens up primaries, but has ranked choice voting, that helps us to ensure that people who win seats in power are winning with the majority support of Alaskans and not a minority support of Alaskans. And then the last one, I think this is the one that it's easiest for people to sign on to, is the elimination of dark money. Yes on 2 protects the integrity and fairness in our election process by making sure that we, the voters, know where every penny came from that is supporting the campaigns for these candidates that are put before us. There does seem to be some confusion about outside money versus dark money. And I think maybe we can get into that a little bit later because I'm sure people have questions about that. So I want to be able to make sure that we're hearing from everybody. But I can't think of a reason why transparency would be bad.
Right.
And I think that how that also informs the other two aspects of the initiative is if we only had open primaries, hypothetically, the orange team could run a candidate and say that they're the purple team, but they're actually funding that purple candidate. Sorry, oops, let's decline that call.
She's
And
busy.
put a bunch of dark money into this like lackluster purple candidate that doesn't actually represent purple values and nobody votes for them and they get more votes for their orange candidate. Without more transparency, we would never know that the orange team infiltrated and ran a spoiler candidate in the purple, under the purple's like name and manner. So I hope that that helps to demonstrate how these three components really work together in what's truly a really bold and innovative way, where Alaskans have studied what other people have done and have decided to put all of these together in a like super meaningful and powerful way to ensure that voters have the most power, or have back the most power that we should have when it comes to picking representatives that make decisions about all of our lives here in Alaska.
Yeah, that's great, Dalecia. Thank you. I do want to circle back because I too am interested in hearing more about outside money versus dark money. I was listening to a great conversation on Alaska Public Media, and I think we were kind of talking off the mic a little bit before we started about that. And Shay Siegert was on that call along with Rachel Callender. And there was a lot of talk about the confusion around outside money versus dark money. And honestly, you know, that part of this ballot measure is one of the primary reasons that I was drawn to this ballot measure, because it seems like such a no-brainer. And we know how easily that politicians can be controlled by the power of the purse, and that we're talking about this and actually being, you know, informed and diligent and directed in making change is just, I think, such an opportunity. So I'd like to revisit that. So thank you so very much. Now I'm going to move to our next guest and introduce Mohit Nair, and he is the Partnerships Director of FairVote of Washington. Mohit, did I say, if I'm not messing up your first name, I'm messing up your last name. How did I do the last name?
Mohit Nair.
Nair. Got it. Okay, like sire. I won't forget it now. Mohit Nair. Okay, you see that word association? That always helps. Okay, good. So Mohit, please introduce yourself and tell us a little bit more about why you are an advocate for Yes on 2.
Thank you so much, Kim, and the other panelists that are here with us today. I'm so excited to be here with you. My name is Mohit Nair. As Kim said, I'm the Partnerships Director of FairVote Washington. We're a nonpartisan nonprofit that's committed to making our democracy more fair, functional, and accessible through ranked choice voting. So that's the part of Yes on 2 that I'm particularly passionate about. But of course, ending dark money and sort of opening up our primary to more voters, increasing representation is an integral part of the initiative itself. So let's talk about our current system, right? Nationwide, statewide, we have a current system that really relies on something called plurality voting. That means that basically voters have to choose between the lesser of two evils, as Dalecia was saying. Rather than voting for their conscience or their honest first choice, voters often have to choose between two undesirable candidates, and many choose not to vote at all as a result. You only need to look at sort of turnout results to see that that's the case. Those who do vote for their honest choice are honestly labeled as being, as having wasted their vote or spoiling the chances of a major nominee. So if you look at the presidential election, you know, in the Ralph Nader case in 2000, he was labeled a spoiler candidate and people accused him of costing Gore the election. Same thing with Jill Stein voters in 2016. If you look at Alaska itself, no US Senate candidate in Alaska has received the majority of the vote in a general election since 2002. That's nearly 2 decades. It's a problem in your gubernatorial races as well. So in the last 6 gubernatorial elections, 2 candidates won without receiving a majority of the vote. That was Bill Walker with about 48.1% of the vote in 2014 and Sarah Palin in 2006 with 48.3%. Now, imagine if you had a system with ranked choice voting. It's simple, it's tried and tested, it's nonpartisan, and it easily fixes this problem of plurality voting. Basically, instead of just picking one choice, you would have the ability to rank your top 4 choices that come out of the primary in order of preference. You do it on a daily basis when you're going to, let's say, the grocery store and deciding that you want, you know, Fuji apples, but it's not available. So you're not going to walk out without an apple. You have a backup choice. You have the Cosmic Crisp that you might go for, or another variety. Same thing with ice cream flavors. It's the same intuitive concept. So you rank those top 4 candidates that come from the primary, your first choice, second choice, third choice, and fourth choice if you wish. If a candidate receives a majority of the votes, which means more than 50%, then they're declared the winner of the election and it's over. Very simple. If no candidate receives a majority, then what we do is that you eliminate the candidate who's in last place. But the important thing here is the voices of those voters still matter. So if you voted for that candidate who came in last place, then your second choices are taken into account and you recount until basically a candidate wins with a clear majority. Your vote and your voice both matter very much under the system. And what we see with research from places that use RCV around the country is it actually mitigates barriers to representation that often prevail in single winner or plurality winner systems. So how does it do this? It does it through a variety of ways. One is it eliminates the problem of vote splitting. So that means you often have multiple women and candidates from BIPOC communities who can run without worrying about spoiling the election. It also incentivizes positive and issues-focused campaigning. I know from having been around the country in 2016, how negative that election was and how that affects turnout for folks. They remember it as one of the most negative presidential elections in history. Happens in state level races all the time. What people don't know is that's often a function of the system that we have. So imagine if we have a ranked choice election and I'm a candidate that's campaigning and I'm knocking on doors. I go to my neighbor and I see a lawn sign for my opponent. Under the existing system, I have no incentive to engage with that voter. It's a waste of my money. I'm not going to go to that household. Why would I waste my time? Under ranked choice voting, you're not only asking people to put you down as a first choice, but saying, hey, guess what? Maybe put me down as a second or third choice because I align with your favorite candidate on XYZ issues, or I share these ideological similarities. Here's what makes me unique. And so you would still engage with that voter. It completely changes the game on negative attack ads. It also ensures representative outcomes. So we find that officials who are elected in RCV contests report that they govern better because they know that they have a majority of support. Some people will think, this is only interesting for Democrats, but you look at Republicans in Utah, they have been using it for a while to elect their candidates in the general or in the primaries because they want to put the most favored candidate forward to compete against the Democrat. In the previous 9 years, out of 156 local ranked choice elections among 3 or more candidates, we've seen that women have won 48% of these elections. And of those winners, 38% have been women of color. Just at the start of this year alone, women were half of all mayors and 49% of all city council members that were elected using ranked choice voting. And if you look at California alone, San Francisco, San Leandro, Oakland, and I believe Berkeley, candidates of color have actually won 62% of all ranked choice voting races compared to only 38% prior to RCV. It's also, the last thing I'll say is, it's not new in Alaska either. If you look at April in the Democratic presidential primary, Alaska actually allowed those voters to rank their choices in the Democratic presidential primary. What did that mean? Imagine if you had a crowded field like we had. I will say in this presidential primary, we had the most diverse field in history ever. By the time it came to Alaska, it was down to about Joe Biden and Bernie Sanders, but I think Bernie Sanders may have even dropped out. But in Washington, what we saw was a lot of voters, about 390,000 or so, cast their ballot for a candidate who dropped out before the March 10th deadline. In contrast, in Alaska, voters could rank their honest first choices. Let's say I'm a Warren supporter, I could have put Warren first and then Bernie second if they align on progressive values. If I was a moderate voter, I could have put Klobuchar or Buttigieg first and second and then Biden third. And that would ensure you don't split the vote, you don't elevate someone you really don't want, and you don't see a situation like the election of a candidate like Donald Trump, who did not receive a majority of the votes in the Republican primary. So under our current system, the takeaway is you punish voters and you limit the number of choices that you have. And it doesn't have to be this way.
Yeah, all points taken. Thank you so much, Mohit. And I'm going to revisit the portion of the examples with you, because as we were talking again, kind of offline before we started this, like I've been learning a lot about Maine and about where ranked choice voting has worked in other places and how, other voters have felt about that system. You just shared with me that Maine is using that in their upcoming presidential election. I want to talk more about that. So I'm going to come back to you on that. Thank you so much. And I am very excited to move along to our third guest, Mr. Jonathon Taylor. So Jonathon is a lifelong Alaskan and he is a former UAA student body president. Go Seawolves. Jonathon, if you want to turn your mic on and tell us a little bit about yourself and why you're so passionate about ballot measure 2.
Yeah, well, thank you, Kimberly. I'm really, really glad I was able to join everyone for this. I am a lifelong Alaskan, was born and raised here, so Alaska is really a place I call home. And it's importantly, I think, a place where I think I'd like to call home for quite a while. Part of the reason I'm so passionate about ballot measure 2 is because I think that our state is pretty obvious, we have some big choices in front of us over the next couple of years, some intense choices, whether it relates to fiscal issues, whether it relates to budget issues, whether it relates to how we're going to continue providing services to people in Alaska. Those are all things that are important. And I think it's really critical, much like Mohit said, that those individuals we elect to be representative of our communities, but they also have the holistic support of the communities they represent. So the opportunity to have ranked choice voting and the opportunity for those candidates to actually have to engage with people who might not necessarily be within their niche, who might not always agree with them on every single issue, I think is important because it gives us better representation. And I think that better representation leads to better outcomes for Alaskans in the long term. I also think it's really important that we do have an understanding of where the money that comes to fund particular candidates comes from. I think as informed voters, as Alaska citizens, that's absolutely something that we should know. We should be informed when we're making our decision. And so that shining a light on dark money, I think, is particularly important because it helps us be more informed voters when we go to the ballot box. I think the last thing that I'll say really is I think particularly for people of color, particularly here in Alaska, the opportunity to have a primary system that is more open really levels the playing field and creates more opportunity for people who are not a part of the political apparatuses to not necessarily just run in a primary election, but potentially advance to a general election where they have the ability to potentially represent their communities. I think the current primary system really disenfranchises people who aren't in the system or know the right people, and it shouldn't really be that way. And so I think opening up that system is really important. It helps make sure we get that better representation. I want to be here in Alaska for a long time. I want our state to have a really good future, and I think it's really important for us to get there. We have to have good representation. We have to have folks in Juneau who are going to be able to collaborate, to be able to get along and make good decisions if they're representing us. And I think that the components of this initiative working together really allow us to access those benefits.
Yeah, noted on all. Thank you so much, Jonathon. And we are going to kind of round robin now because there are a couple things that I want to follow up with questions with our panelists. And we want to shout out to Jackson. He's managing the Facebook comments. If any of you have comments that you want to post there, we will make sure that we ask the experts, AKA our panelists. And we are also joined by Alex from Ballot Measure 2, Alex Murphy. She's also on this call. And so we will do our best to navigate and get your questions answered. But Jonathon, you kind of left off with something that I wanted to circle back with Dalecia about. Okay, so you talked about the dark money, getting that out of politics, and I was saying that originally this is what really drove me to Ballot Measure 2 because it blows my mind that there are no enforced regulations, and I want to stress that word enforced, that are put into place to help us, the voter, become better informed about who is funding these candidates and who is kind of helping to drive their decisions. I mean, we've had a lot of commentary about that even with our current president-elect, and I know that sometimes from my own kind of personal sleuthing, what I'm trying to do when I'm hearing the names on these commercials of super PACs or these groups, so I'm trying to go down the rabbit hole and get more information. And sometimes that can be a lot more difficult than you bargained for. When you really start doing the work and trying to trace it back, you're like, I can't find out where this money is coming from, and it's going to this obsolete group that is registered in Utah or someplace, and you can't get any additional information. I think it is so important to get the dark money out of politics. And Dalecia, I wanted you to further define for those of you who are on the call again, because I did hear this come up on the Alaska Public Media call about the outside money versus dark money. So kind of shed some light on that for us, please.
Happy to. So just to offer some clarity just about how campaigns are run, not only here, but just about everywhere, is that there isn't a campaign in Alaska that does not seek out allies and like-minded groups to find funding for their campaign, whether it's a ballot initiative or a candidate. And I don't even have to go through all of the receipts. Anyone can go on any news outlet right now because they're talking about Alaskan politicians' money right now about how many millions of dollars are being fueled into behind candidates' campaigns. So outside money is not something that is new in any part of Alaskan politics or our country's politics. Because of Citizens United, which gives corporations the right to use money as free speech, and the function of super PACs and organizations like that, where if I maybe don't want my name associated with something, I will send my $1 billion that I just have lying around for this to this outside organization and give it to them. And they are not required to disclose that I gave them money. And then they're going to use that money to support what I told them to. And so the people who are voting on those issues are never going to know that I was the person behind that. And then I can still go about my business as usual without being associated with that particular candidate or issue. There's a lot wrong with that. For the voters, one, we don't know who has been flooding our mailboxes, our Facebook algorithms, our discourse really about these topics. They've actually been highly, highly, highly influenced by somebody whose name we will never know. So that is what dark money is essentially. It's money that we don't know the contributor. We do have disclaimer laws here in Alaska about where money is coming from, but they're not strong enough. And so that's why that component is part of our ballot measure initiative, is so that we, the voters, know who provided, every dollar and what they're trying to do with that money. And so that's the gist of it. So I hope I explained a little bit about what outside money is and how outside money isn't necessarily the enemy. It's just the reality of politics. But what we can do, since we can't get rid of outside money, which is true, we can't get rid of outside money. The power that we do have, though, is to make our disclaimer laws stronger than they are now. And that comes up a lot. There seems to be some confusion about that in regards to our ballot initiative, because we are funded by outside organizations that saw what we were doing and saw it just as I saw it, as a bold and innovative way for election reform. Arguably, these organizations don't have anything to gain or lose in the outcome of it, besides Alaska being a pioneer in election reform. And I think that that's pretty awesome. Mm-hmm. And on our website, we have every penny that's been disclosed, we have every penny that's been given to us, from big contributors to small contributors. And we make every penny clear to people and make it very, very easy to find where all of our money has come from.
Yeah, that's good to hear. And it should be easy to access. I see that Alex has posted a resource about that there in our chat bar. And while we are on the topic of outside money versus dark money, before I move to Mohit for my next question, was there anyone that had a question for Dalecia on this part of the ballot measure? Was there anything that you should that we should pay attention to? I'm kind of looking here. So this one is on ranked choice voting overall. Hey, Alicia, do you want to take a question on ranked choice voting overall before I move along? Okay, yeah. I think you got this. Okay, so a question from Facebook. I have a question about the ranked choice voting as described here. Why are we limited to only the top 4? How are these top 4 selected? So I'm assuming that this question is that they are saying, why are they limited to the top 4 choices?
Mhm.
Is that it? Okay, Dalecia, do you think you can shed any light on that?
Yeah, so I'll answer the second half of that question first, and then hopefully that'll help to answer the first
Okay.
part of that question. So, how are the top 4? How are the top 4 candidates selected? So, with how open primaries. How open primaries will function or do function is that um, the voters will be able, all the voters will receive the same ballot, and that will have the people who are running for that. And so if we were to limit, that won't be limited to only 4 candidates on that primary ballot. What we are being asked to do is rate our top 4. I can't really speak to why the number 4 was chosen, besides it just being a good number to or kind of a middle ground for this. And I think it also has to do with other places that have do have ranked choice voting. It's either 4 or 5. I believe that it was Mohit who had shared that, who was talking about the Alaskan Democratic presidential primary, where we had, I want to say, 5 or 6 candidates on that ticket. And we were asked to, I did participate in that, and I can even talk to that a little bit more, because I think that a lot of that primary actually highlights some of the cracks in our current system. And then we're asked to rank our top 4 pick. So those top 4, those are the 4 that are going to advance to the general election. And in the primary, that's where we are asked, the voters are asked to rank our choice from 1st, 2nd, 3rd, and 4th, 4th pick. And so maybe Alex or Jackson, I hope I've explained that to the best of my ability as to how that will actually work in the general versus the primary.
Okay. Mohit, I was coming to you next, so I didn't know if you had anything to add to that question before I ask you the questions that I had about ranked choice voting in other states.
Sure, I think it's kind of related. I will say, Dalecia is 100% right. Different jurisdictions do it differently. So a lot of places do top 4, top 5. In Washington, the bill that and to be clear, we don't have ranked choice voting right now, but we're proposing a bill, and that's the local options bill in the legislature. We're considering a statewide ballot initiative in the future as well to take it directly to the voters. But the bill says, let's do away with the primary altogether, because primaries can be disproportionately, older, wealthier, whiter. So it can sort of disenfranchise community groups. If you get rid of the primary, you can have a high turnout general election, use ranked choice voting, rank as many candidates as you want. However, there is, in our gubernatorial election, this year in the primary, you had 30 plus candidates. So you can't expect someone to rank all 30 choices. And so one option we offer as well, we leave it up to the local jurisdictions, and we say, in some cases, a winnowing primary might be helpful. What Washington has right now is a top 2. We know top 2 is awful because it really, really limits choices for voters. You can get 2 candidates from the same party. That happened in the lieutenant governor's race in this year. Basically, in the general election, there'll be 2 Democrats on the ballot, no Republican representation. In 2016, we had the same thing with 2 Republicans on the ballot, no Democrats. And then there's the racial equity piece of it and how it impacts, communities of color. So top 5 or top 4 would be better than that, because chances are you wouldn't sort of just have all candidates from one party. You'll also see other parties represented, other communities represented. And then by ranking candidates, you would ensure that your honest choice for your preferred candidate does not detract from getting someone that you really don't want to the election. Because a lot of people will say, in this election, for example, if I vote, let's say, Green Party for Howie Hawkins or somebody else in the presidential, what I really don't want is somebody like, let's say a Republican to be elected if I'm progressive and a Green, and I would presumably align more with Democrats ideologically. Same thing with a Libertarian candidate and a Republican. So that kind of sort of strategic gamesmanship is eliminated. You can honestly just vote for your favorite choices, and you can rest assured that your honest favorite your vote will stick with your honest favorite until that candidate is out of the running. And at that point, it will transfer to your second choice.
oops, I'm muted, sorry. The question that I had to piggyback off that too is that I think there's this misconception kind of swirling around that you have to use the ranked choice system as opposed to you can just pick your favorite if that's what you want to do, and that's it. Or you can pick your first and second choice, right?
That's
So
exactly-
I've heard people who are saying, well, I don't want my ballot to be discarded if I just choose my top choice. And I'm saying that's crazy. That would never happen.
That would never happen. And exactly, all that means, it might help folks understand it better if you think about a runoff election. It's like if you came to the election, you put down your vote for your candidate and then didn't show up to the runoff, right? So it's like if your candidate is out, then you don't have a say anymore. But your voice stays with your first choice. You can just rank that candidate first. And then you say you have no other preference between the other folks. And so at that point, your ballot wouldn't go further.
Yeah, well, Mohit, tell us a little bit about ranked choice in other states, or give us some examples.
Sure.
Of how this
Delicia's hand go up. Delicia, did you have something to add?
Yes, I wanted to to say like one as definitively as possible. If you decide that you only want to vote for one candidate, you have that right under this ballot initiative. And to speak to that, in the Democratic presidential primary, I had to change my affiliation in order to participate, in order to cast my vote for my candidate that I wanted to see run in the general presidential election. And that was actually the first instance where I learned about ranked choice voting. What the utility that offered to me as a voter, and this was before I became involved with this initiative at all, as a voter, as soon as I understood the rules, that really made me go and look at all of the candidates a little bit more. Because at that point, I really didn't care what some of these candidates had to say. I felt like I had my pick like locked in. But then when I understood that, like, oh, if my preferred candidate doesn't win, my vote necessarily doesn't just get contributed to the loser. I could still cast my second choice and have that, and still have my vote contribute to the winner, in the idea that or how it's retabulated. And so that really did make me go and make sure that I was more informed about the other candidates as well. But in the end, I actually bubbled in my one single candidate for all of them, because I felt that my candidate like really spoke to the issues that were important to me, and I got to do that. But I was really happy. And I did feel empowered by the process of being able to potentially cast a vote for another candidate if I had wanted to. And I did explore that. And I did come to the conclusion that I had only wanted to support one particular candidate in that regards. And I was happy that I could do that too, because I remember that was sort of my second question, like, oh, I don't know if I want to give my vote to any of these other people. So I did my due diligence and did the research, and it said that I could still just vote for a single candidate. And something that I see and hear a lot regarding that, we're like, oh, if I only pick one candidate and they lose, then my ballot goes away. I was like, well, if you only picked one candidate between one and two candidates and your candidate lost, how is that any different? Like, your voice was heard in both instances, you just lost in both instances. What ranked choice voting offers us, the voters, is to, like I mentioned earlier, vote our conscience, vote who we really want to see in office with our first vote, and then with our second vote, vote a little bit more strategically. Like, maybe I will use my second vote to vote against a different candidate in case my first one doesn't win. And that's actually really empowering to me as the voter. Even though in my experience, in my personal experience, when I did get to vote in ranked choice voting, I did decide to only cast my vote for a single candidate, but that was my right to do.
Right, definitely. Well, thank you for that. And what I'm actually going to do is move along to Jonathon, and Mohit, I'm going to come back to you as my last question. Sure. For examples of ranked choice voting in other states in the interest of time, because I want to make sure that we're able to move it around, and then also leave some time for some additional questions. And you know what, before I forget, if someone from the Yes on 2 team, maybe Alex, if there are other folks from Yes on 2 on this call, if you could put your names on their names in the chat bar. I just want to make sure that am shouting them out and acknowledging them. We are CC'd on emails, and there are a lot of different people, and I may not know everyone's name, so I just wanted to make sure that I acknowledge them and said hello. So thank you for that. And so now I'm going to move to you, Jonathon. And Jonathon, we were kind of talking offline about representation in terms of people of color, not only within the state of Alaska, but within the country. And what I was mentioning to you, I said, I've been pleasantly surprised as someone who is pro-women, who believes that women have been denied leadership roles for way far too long and have been marginalized, and all the other things that we could talk about on this call, but we don't have the time. I have said that I am actually pleased with the amount of women that have been elected officials that have been elected here in the state of Alaska. We are not leading, but nationwide, we do pretty well in this area, and we can be proud of that. Of course, well, there's always more work to be done. But what Jonathon, what you and I were kind of talking about was the fact that the same does not apply for people of color, and it is a very stark contrast when you look at the landscape of elected politicians here in the state of Alaska. And we know that representation matters. We know having someone who looks like us, who may have had similar experiences, coming up with their ancestral history, with their family, with their experiences in the state of Alaska as a person of color. We know that really matters, right? And we're starting to talk more about that. It's not like we haven't talked about that before, but I think that more and more in recent years, even before President Obama was elected, we kind of talked about the importance of diversity with our elected officials. So in terms of Alaska, Black, Indigenous, and people of color underrepresented grossly in Alaskan politics. Non-Native, Black, Indigenous, people of color candidates face the worst odds in the current elections. And this information is a summary brought to you by Equity in Elections in AK. Ranked choice voting makes the elected population more representative of the population electing them. So in essence, it helps the elected population look more like the people they serve. So Jonathon, I just kind of wanted you to speak and expand upon that a little bit.
Yeah, so I think really the ranked choice component of it is particularly important. As Kimberly said, I think sometimes people don't recognize why seeing someone who looks like you in a position of power or achieving elected office or political office is important. But it is important because what it implicitly says, particularly to young people of color, is this is something you can do, right? When you don't see faces that look like yourself, when you don't see faces that look like yours, on that list of elected representatives, it can feel like that spot isn't for you. It can feel like you don't belong. And so I think those opportunities through ranked choice voting to diversify who we're putting into office, particularly for women and people of color, is important. The other thing I would say that I think is particularly important, and I've seen this happen, it's actually happened to me before, is our primary system also serves as, I think, a really significant barrier to entry for Black and Indigenous people of color, as well as women in general. If you're not I don't think a lot of people realize how party apparatuses work sometimes. And if you're not sort of in the know, you're not really a part of the system, it can be difficult for you to get access to the resources or the support that you need in order to be a viable candidate. A lot of people also don't realize that to some extent, a lot of the work that political parties do is machinery. So they recruit candidates to run for particular offices or in particular districts because they think they're likely to be successful, or they think that they can force the other party to engage with them on a different level, sort of deprive them of resources in other areas. It's very intentional. And having an open primary system, I apologize if you guys can hear that. Apparently, there's a motorcycle outside my house now. But having an open primary system removes the barrier to entry for people. It means that there's potential for you, you'll appear on a single ballot with everyone. And so you could get the support of your friends and your neighbors and the people who know you in your community and your district. And it means that you actually have a shot to appear on a general election ballot, right? And so I think that's why those two things work so importantly together in tandem, is because not only are we increasing the opportunities for individuals to be elected at the end of the process, we're increasing opportunities for them to actually become involved in that process at the very beginning. It's no longer who do you know, what favors can you call in to try and, get the support that you need. You have a much better chance of actually making it to that general election, which is super, super important if we're going to be able to access, those benefits of more diversity and, elected officials that are reflective of our population. So.
Yeah, definitely. Well, again, I think that matters. And I think that we, it is important that we have the conversations. And I very much, appreciate your insight there and want to remind anyone, if you have any questions, we have about 15 minutes left. So I'm going to circle back. I have one more question for each of our panelists, and then I'm going to give the opportunity to take additional questions. We want to give a big shout out to Amy on the Alaskans, for Better Elections team. Hi, Amy. And again, we are taking questions from Facebook Live. What's up, Facebook Live? So if you've got questions, hey, Amy. If you've got questions, make sure to submit them. They will get to us. We already answered a question submitted on Facebook Live. So for those of you that are there, you can submit them there. And also those of you that are here, just drop them in the chat. What I wanted to do is circle back around quickly in the interest of time. Dalecia, I wanted to ask you to share your thoughts about the Alaskan Democratic primary and what you think about that current system, past or current.
Thank you. Before I do, Jonathon, thank you for bringing up those excellent points. As you were talking, I wanted to also add just a comment to that there are plenty of women of color, women in general, people of color who are talking about like, hey, I think that I want to run for this. And behind doors, they are told, wait your turn. And I know that for a fact that happens. Or they were like, just wait a little bit. We're totally like want to run you, just not right now because of this, this, and this, and this, and this. And so a lot of people there, we are strategically left out of politics, even if we are trying to get into them. And I truly believe that ballot measure 2 has the potential to be essentially an equalizer to that, so that I don't have to wait for permission from the establishment to be heard and to run and to potentially win in order to represent voters in the interests that I align with many of them on. So thank you, Taylor, for peeking that in the gears of my brain. But to your question, I already shared a little bit about my experience, or at least about how I used the functionality and understood the functionality of ranked choice voting in the primary. But before I even got my ballot that asked me to rank the choices on the ballot, I am actually registered as unaffiliated, and I have been my entire voting life. The Democratic Party I was constantly getting messages from people and even posts on their official Facebook page that said, don't forget to change your affiliation so that you can vote in the primary. They were telling that because they know that a lot of the Alaskans are not registered Democrats, but only registered Democrats could vote in their presidential primary. And so that shines a light on that system, in that that could have had the potential to and did have the potential for people to infiltrate a party that they are not actually affiliated with, and vote for somebody that might not actually represent that private party's agenda. Now, I voted, and I do believe that a lot of people did go ahead and change their affiliation to follow those rules that they set in order to participate in that primary. Um, because they are responsible voters who wanted to cast their vote and have that heard with who for the candidate who would be sent to go up against our current incumbent president right now. And so I have like every faith that a lot of the voters like me wanted to participate in that and have their voice heard. And we were willing to change our official voter registration in order to do so. But I'm still pretty bitter that I was asked to do that it wasn't enough for me to be an Alaskan registered voter to have my voice heard in that. And so I wanted to share that. And that the primary ticket, I was trying to think, there was Biden, Papa Bernie Sanders, Liz Warren, Klobuchar, Buttigieg. So yeah, so that was 5 people, and we were asked to rank 4 of them. And the utility in that also, and I think that I had already mentioned this before as well, is that if we are told that we're not just picking one or the other, we the voters aren't just going to think, okay, who are the 2 people, or what side do I want to vote on? Okay, let me just already decide on that and not do further research into these other voices that are in the game. If we are telling people that there are going to be 4 people that we can vote on, we're going to have to do our due diligence to understand the platform, but they are also going to have to do the work to make sure that their message reaches me. So that even if they're not my first pick, they potentially could still win with my second choice vote. And I really think that is going to really revolutionize our local politics here, because just in terms of equity, but also amongst the issues. There are so many issues where the population of Alaska have a very clear majority stance on a topic, but our body of lawmakers do not reflect that. And that's because they're winning by appealing to their base and galvanizing them to come out and vote them into power with less than a majority of voters. That can end with a yes on 2.
Yeah, thank you so much, Dalecia, for speaking to that. I definitely agree. I have 2 quick questions, one for Mohit, one for Jonathon, and then we have some questions from the people, and I want to make sure that we get to those. So we want to move this along. We got about 9 minutes. Let's try to keep it on time. Mohit, give us a couple of quick examples of ranked choice voting in other states and tell us how it's worked.
Sure. So across the country, there's more than almost 20 places around the country that use ranked choice voting, from Minneapolis to San Francisco to the entire state of Maine. So Maine adopted it in 2016. And I think some of the things that Dalecia was talking about in terms of how it changes the nature of campaigning, how voters have to understand the system better, Maine's a great case study for this because they used it in 2018. There was the Democrat Jared Golden running against the Republican Bruce Poliquin, and then there were 2 independent candidates. In the first round of counting, Bruce Poliquin was actually ahead, but Jared Golden effectively did the coalition building work that's necessary, reached out to the independent candidates. The independent candidates said, consider ranking the Democrat as your second choice. And effectively, Jared Golden won that election. And that sort of speaks to how ranked choice voting can change a race. It can, again, make it more positive. It can make sure that those voters are not ignored. It can make those candidates more accountable to the voters. So beyond, Maine and Minneapolis, you had 5 cities use it for the first time in 2019. New York City, which has a long and vibrant history with this, in the early 40s, ranked choice voting was used in New York City, and they elected the first African-American to city council using this system. And they used a more proportional form of it, which, made it even easier for candidates from communities of color to be elected. But then it was subsequently repealed because of the party pushback from both major parties. And just last year, New Yorkers voted to bring ranked choice voting back through a charter amendment, and it was approved with over 70% support. And so the editorial boards of major newspapers have sort of endorsed the issue in places ranging from Maine to New York. In Santa Fe, 94% of respondents said they were satisfied with their voting experience when they used it. The election itself cost only about $10,000. And 71% said they would support the use of ranked choice voting in future elections. And nearly 90% reported ranking more than one candidate. So to anyone who tells you the system doesn't work, it's not true. It's not borne out by the data. And the other thing I will say is, one of the opposition talking points that I really don't like, that I frankly think is a racist dog whistle, is this idea that somehow ranked choice voting is too
Confusing.
It's confusing,
Right.
It's complicated for those minority voters. I actually saw one of the studies that was cited by an opposition group. The study had the gall to actually say sophisticated voters and then unsophisticated voters. And I'm like, how can you use terminology like that? It just shows you the kind of intention that's there with that kind of work. Now, I'm not saying voter education is super important. We have to invest in that. We have to make sure people understand the system, but there is no evidence to suggest that minority candidates or communities of color, BIPOC communities understand this issue any less well than other communities.
Yeah, and I hear you there, Mohit, and it like pinged me in my ear the first time I heard the narrative spun, because I'm like, wait, people of every color have had to make choices. We all know what it's like to make a choice. We all know what it's like to make our first choice, then make our second, and then make our third. And it's not confusing for me because I'm a Black woman to make my choices. So what's that about? So thank you for thank you for hitting on that. I appreciate that. And moving along to Jonathon, we got a couple questions before we wrap up here. Jonathon, and actually, Mohit's last comment was a good lead into this. What do you think is the biggest misconception that you have heard about ballot measure 2, or is there a talking point that you just want to take some time to personally clear up that you have heard perpetuated out into the universe on the ballot measure?
Yeah, I was going to say it is definitely that idea that it is too complicated for people to understand. Like, just on a facile level, I think it's a little bit disingenuous to suggest that Alaskans don't understand maybe when there might be problems with our system of elections. I think most voters are pretty savvy and can understand that. That's the first thing. And I think the polling bears that out, that people generally tend to support these types of good governance policies. But I think second is this idea that it's too complicated. Look, we all make choices. And if you can understand how to make choices and you can understand how to rank those choices in order of preference, you can understand how to vote in a ranked choice voting election. I also think it's worth noting that election officials are usually pretty good at their jobs and are usually pretty good about providing people additional information and clarity. And so I think it's a little disingenuous to suggest that, the fine folks that are working to make sure that we can exercise our right to vote would be so disingenuous as to just leave people hanging out in the dark if there were any confusion.
Yeah, thank you so much. And I told you this hour would fly by, and true to that, we got about 3 or 4 minutes. So I want to take questions, and I've got one I'm going to start with here in the chat bar from Heath Day. But for anyone who wants to submit a question on Facebook Live, or if you're on the call, if you want to drop that in the chat bar, feel free to do that. And I will leave it open for Mohit Nair, for Dalecia Young, or for Jonathon Taylor to take. So Heath, the floor is yours if you want to unmute yourself and go ahead and ask your question.
Thank you. First of all, thank you guys for putting this together. Been very informative and appreciate hearing your perspectives. I just received in the mail, as most people in Alaska probably have, the election pamphlet that lays out all the different ballot measures and people running for different offices. And in there, there's the statement in opposition to ballot measure 2, which is authored by Mark Begich and Sean Parnell, former US senators and governors of the state. And some of the things that they list as opposition are specifically things that you've mentioned, but they also say a couple of things beyond that. One is, it says in here that if a voter does not rank all the candidates, they could find their ballot excluded from the final vote as though the voter didn't show up for the election. I know you addressed that, but I'm curious why they would include that if it's not at all true. And another piece that they put in here is that there are a number of states that have experimented with it, but have since repealed this type of ballot measure in their areas. Is that something you can speak to that you know about? And what has been kind of the situations where that has happened?
Okay, very good. So let's start with the first part of that question. So in terms of your vote not counting, let's quickly address that. Who wants to take that, and why would that be put in a piece of literature about ballot measure 2?
Do you want me to? I can.
Jonathon, yeah.
Take it, yeah. So I think there is a general misconception that if somebody, sort of like Dalecia said earlier, there's a general misconception out there that if you don't rank all 4 of the choices, or all of the choices available on that general election ballot, that for some reason the ballot won't count. That's not the case. If you as a voter choose that you only want to fill in that first bubble, or that you do actually want to fill in all 4, the ballot is still going to be counted. Your vote is still going to be counted. But much like Dalecia said, if you were in a situation where, you know, in the current system, you really only have that binary choice. And so this sort of avoids that problem. It still gives people the option, if they so choose, of saying, I only want to fill in the 1 bubble. And if my candidate, that single candidate, doesn't make it, you know, through the process of that sort of instant runoff process, I'm fine with that. That's a choice that people can have. And if that's a choice that they want to make, they can. I think Mohit said it earlier, usually I think it's about 90% of candidates or of voters choose to actually complete the entire ballot and fill out all of those choices. So I think it's just a misconception that folks have about how that process works.
So it's actually a potentially confusing spin, right? Because if I vote for my top candidate and my top candidate isn't the one that wins, then they're not the one that wins. And ranked choice voting, when you vote for your top candidate, say you only check 1 bubble and say that candidate doesn't win, then they go to the next choice of the majority, right? And so it's not to say that your first choice doesn't count. It means that your first choice didn't win, or the choice that you chose did not win. So it is, you're saying it's essentially very misleading and essentially false that is being put onto literature about ranked choice voting, because it's just not the way it goes. Is that what I'm hearing? Yeah, okay.
I also wanted to add to that, and Alex shared this in the chat, but I did want to read it aloud, that, you know, and wanting to think the best of the opposition's intentions and not assume that they're trying to spread in misinformation intentionally,
Sure.
with, you know, malice or anything like that. There have been cities that did require voters to rank all candidates. However, ballot measure 2 that is on the ballot for Alaskan voters does not have that requirement, and actually specifically is written to give voters the freedom to choose to rank however many they wish, and to still have their vote count.
That's super important. Thank you for clarifying that. And I want to move on to the second portion of Heath's question, which is there are some examples that are cited of states that have repealed ranked choice voting. Did you want to speak to that at all? Let me see. Mohit, did you want to speak to that at all?
I can definitely handle that. So I think in the beginning, I was talking about New York City, which used it in the 30s and the 40s. They repealed it because you saw the first sort of non-establishment candidates get elected. You saw, again, the first African-American get elected to city council, who later went on to serve in Congress. And the Republicans and Democrats together tried to repeal the use of RCV in New York. On the 5th time, they actually succeeded, and New York City stopped using ranked choice voting. And I mentioned just last year, voters have now voted to sort of bring it back. Not the form they were using earlier, but the sort of single winner form where it's used for primary elections to avoid expensive runoff elections. I will also say, you know, in Washington state, Pierce County was one county that used it before any other place did in recent history, you know, before Maine. So that jurisdiction used ranked choice voting when there wasn't equipment in place, when it was fairly new. It was an expensive process, but the process largely worked as intended. And it was in response to the fact that Washington used to have sort of an open blanket primary, and then that was actually eliminated. And ranked choice voting was seen as a way to address that. And effectively, when the courts ruled that the top 2 could be used, voters then saw maybe ranked choice voting was not as necessary, and so it was repealed. But now we're sort of getting it right back. And so in all of these cases, it's kind of disingenuous to suggest that it didn't work, and that's why voters repealed it. The story is far more nuanced. And if you just look at the number of places that are using it today, you'll get to see that it's something that has momentum behind it, and it's working in these places. The data is out there for everyone to see.
Yeah, I feel like in a lot of ways, ranked choice voting is kind of like And look, and other parts of ballot measure too, not just the ranked choice voting part, but I feel like the most innovation and the biggest changes in our government happen from the ground up. And I very much feel this way about ballot measure 2. This is the people speaking to the dysfunction of the system that we know exists in many ways. And we want more choice, and we want better options, and we want more fair elections. And I encourage everyone who took the time to join us on this call to check out some of these amazing resources that are here in the chat bar. The next thing that you can do is also get online at Alaskans for Better Elections, and take your time, as I have too. Look, I am not an expert or a scholar, which is why I am so happy that we have such capable panelists to talk about ballot measure 2, because we want to make sure that we are understanding all the parts of this measure, because there are 3. Very important that we're having these conversations, and I've appreciated the questions. And I don't know if we have any more. I don't see any posted here from Facebook Live, but you could always post your questions or any questions that you may have to the Alaska for Better Elections page on Facebook. So please keep them coming. I want to thank the Alaskans for Better Elections team. I want to thank the Yes on 2 team. I want to thank Amy. I want to thank, who else is on this call? I want to thank Alex. Who else should I thank?
Jackson, we've got Jackson.
Jackson, yes, Jackson, thank you so much. Jackson, you've been awesome navigating these comments. I want to thank our panelists. You have been such fun and so very informative. You've helped me, so thank you. I want to thank Mohit. I want to thank Dalecia, and I want to thank Jonathon. Thank you for your time today, and thank you everyone for logging on to learn more about Yes on 2. And with that, Alex, did you want to wrap it up?
I was just going to say a big thank you to you, Kim, for doing such a great job moderating. This was a fantastic discussion. I hope that everyone learned a little bit more. And just to underscore, please visit our website, get involved. We're coming up on a big day, and everybody needs to get out there and exercise your right to vote. So we could certainly use your support. However you want to get involved in the campaign, please write to us. And thank you for joining us on this Saturday. And everybody have a great day.
Thank you, everyone.
Thanks, everyone.